Another starting pitcher who was connected to the Orioles is now off the board in Michael King. So where do the O's go now to add that top line starting pitching? That's coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Friday, December 19th, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to talk about the Padres re-signing Michael King to a 3-year deal on Thursday night. Because with Dylan Cease already gone, 7 years to the Toronto Blue Jays very early in the offseason, Michael King is the next of this group of kind of 5 top-line free agent starters that are still on the market. And the Orioles were connected to King. So with him gone, what does this mean for the starting pitching pursuit? We'll talk about why King went and re-signed with the Padres, something that nobody really saw coming. We'll talk about why his deal with San Diego is something that the O's or really any other team couldn't realistically match. Then we'll chat about the rest of the guys available, some trade partners potentially as well, and what would happen to the O's if they didn't get any of these top 5 free agent starters. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is part of the #1 sports podcast network. And this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So let's talk about the big news from Thursday night. Unfortunately, it's not an Orioles signing, but it is a big signing around Major League Baseball. And that is 29-year-old right-handed starter Michael King has signed a 3-year, $75 million deal to go back to the San Diego Padres, the team he pitched for in each of his last final 2 seasons before hitting free agency. So the big way this connects to the Orioles is that King has been linked to the O's. It was a Pete Abraham report. It's others reporting that the Orioles have been in on Michael King throughout this free agency, but he goes to the Padres. Now, it is a 3-year, $75 million deal, but it's a little more complicated than that. The reporting from Mark Feinsand and others on Thursday night into Friday is that King will get $12 million in a signing bonus up front and only a $5 million salary for the 2026 season. The Padres kind of strapped for cash right now, not a lot of payroll room, and so that's why they're only paying him $5 million in the first year. But there is a $28 million player option for 2027 and a $30 million player option for 2028. So although it is a quote-unquote 3-year deal, the final 2 years have opt-outs before them for Michael King. He can opt out in either year. There's a chance this is only a 1-year contract, and King goes back on the market next offseason. And that's really the only way the Padres could have paid a pitcher this offseason with the money they have, is to really backload the deal, something similar they did with Nick Pavetta's free agent contract last offseason. And now that Nick Pivetta, made $2 million last year and is going to make $19 million next year, the Padres are potentially going to move him to get off of that salary because of their financial situation since the death of Peter Seidler. Now, Michael King, interesting profile, right? He made only 15 starts this year because he had shoulder issues. Then he came back and had a knee issue. It was a 3.44 ERA in those 15 starts, but he was incredible in 2024. His first full season as a starter, he was traded to the Padres from the Yankees in the Juan Soto deal that previous offseason. He was already kind of being converted to a starter by the Yankees, but the Padres put him in the rotation full-time. He had a 2.95 ERA with great strikeout to walk numbers and made 30 starts in that 2024 season. But again, it is his only year as a full-time starter while being healthy. He had been a really good reliever, but a reliever, albeit with the Yankees in the years before that, prior to the Juan Soto trade. And so you don't have a check mark next to durability and longevity. I had Michael King at number 5 on my top-line free agent starting pitcher wish list. I had Dylan Cease number 1, and I only ranked 5 players in that category, with King being number 5. And I feel like he is the cutoff point of the top guys available in free agency. I think he's in that top 5 and everyone below him is in a second tier. Now, there's a chance, and maybe probably not a higher ceiling than Dylan Cease. I think still probably Cease has the highest ceiling, but Michael King has one of the highest ceilings of those 5 starting pitchers. You could make a strong argument that the ceiling for Michael King is higher than Framber Valdez or than Ranger Suarez, or even depending on what you think of Tatsuya Imai or even Dylan Cease at this point in his career. But the reason why I had him down at number 5, despite the good stuff and despite the high ceiling, is that he's coming off a year with multiple injuries. He's only had one season as a full healthy starter with 30 starts. And you just, at this point, until you see it again, can't trust him to be healthy and durable. And at this point, the Orioles just need better starting pitching. That's number one. But 1A is the Orioles need somebody who is going to be healthy and durable and you can count on to take the ball 30 times. Now, had they gotten Michael King and they were connected to him, the other move probably would have needed to be somebody who could eat a ton of innings while, being a definite top 5 starter in your rotation, and it maybe would have limited the kind of second starting pitcher they would have tried to acquire. Now, multiple places had been reporting that, the Red Sox, Yankees, and Orioles were the finalists on Michael King. Many assume the Padres just wouldn't be able to pay for pitching this offseason at this level. He lives in Florida near the Orioles spring training complex. He's from the Northeast. There was connections there. But there was John Heyman reporting here today that the Yankees never even made a final offer to Michael King. So we'll see how much those other teams were really finalists. But I don't think this contract is about Michael King just taking, the most money that he got offered. I think this is more about market and fit and future for Michael King himself. Now, we're still awaiting some more reporting surrounding the Michael King sweepstakes, but I would be stunned if it's not the case that at least the Red Sox and the Orioles both made at least a better dollar amount offer than this one, than the Padres did. I would assume that most teams wanted to go a shorter term deal on Michael King because of durability concerns. And a lot of the reporting was that the expectation was that King would get either a 3 or 4 year contract, whereas the guys like Suarez and Valdez were looking for something closer to 6 years in free agency. And maybe the average annual value that he got in offers from other teams, like we would think the Orioles, was not as high as he wanted it to. Maybe he was looking for $30 million a year and teams were only offering about $25 million a year, whatever it may be. Or what I think is more realistic and why King went back to San Diego is that he really thinks he can get a true long-term deal, not just one of these, 3-year, $90 million contracts where you get the high average annual value. I think he believes he is due a 6+ year contract that's pushing 150 to 200 million, where he doesn't have to think about getting another contract after that. I mean, he'll only still be 30 next offseason, so he'd still be absolutely on the timeline where he could get a long-term deal and a team would feel comfortable about it. So this, I think, was Michael King fully betting on himself and doing that in a place he knows, a place he's pitched in the last couple of years, a good team that's been in the postseason, a good ballpark to pitch in, and of course, probably one of the best cities in Major League Baseball to live in as well, in San Diego, even if he is from the East Coast. And if he's betting on himself, he is taking a little bit of a risk, but also not so much with this contract. I mean, if King goes out and has a full, healthy, and good season like he did in 2024, he will opt out next offseason. And teams will, I think, be a lot more likely to pony up, a 6-year deal that's going to push over 150 million and could get towards 200 million, just based on what the pitching market's going to look like next offseason. Now, that pitching market will include Tarek Skubal probably, so that's going to be interesting. But on the flip side, if King has another injury, or he shows more durability concerns, or he takes a step back in San Diego in 2026, the player option, it's his decision. So he could just opt in and still guarantee himself $28 million in 2027. He could go out there in 2027 and do the same thing all over again. Maybe that's the year that he's durable and healthy and good again for 30 starts. Then he opts out, and at age 31, he still gets a long-term contract. Or if it goes poorly again in 2027, he's got the ability to just opt into $30 million in San Diego in 2028. And who knows what their financial strains will be at that point. They'll probably be trying to trade him, so that's something he would need to think about. But he can still feel good that he's got, 2 years around 60 million, just kind of waiting for him on the back end if he bets on himself and it doesn't go as he planned in 2026. And it's in a place that he knows and they know his development. That's something that not a lot of teams, including the Orioles, can beat. And here's why. So, you could say, Connor, if you really believe that other teams had better money offers, like I think the Orioles probably offered him something like 3 years and 90 million. I bet there was probably a 4-year, 100-something million offer out there from a team. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. So why do you take a 3-year, $75 million deal where you're only making $5 million plus the signing bonus in the first year? Again, I think Michael King must truly believe that he will get a long-term deal that pushes near $200 million next offseason if he has this good season in 2026 and is healthy and opts out. If he signs that 3 to 4 year contract now that doesn't have any opt-outs, unlike the San Diego deal he got, he's not a free agent again until he's 33 years old. And at that point, that's the age where it becomes a lot harder to get a huge deal. Like Framber Valdez is 32, and people are already talking about, you really going to give that guy 6 years? If you got Michael King at 33 and still wouldn't have the durability history that Valdez has, you've got even more questions about getting that big long-term contract. The Padres, however, are really the only team that can truly offer Michael King a deal like this with an opt-out after 2026 because they were the team that gave him the qualifying offer, right? The Padres offered him the qualifying offer. He declined it and became a free agent. But that meant that any team that signed Michael King would have to forfeit a draft pick. For example, if the Orioles signed Michael King, they would have had to forfeit their second round pick in the 2026 draft. That is a pretty valuable draft pick, especially with where the Orioles finished this year. It's a pretty high pick in the draft. Most teams are not going to be willing to give up that pick for a short-term contract. And since the Padres are retaining him, if you re-sign the player you offer the qualifying offer to, yes, you don't get a compensation draft pick, but you also don't lose a draft pick. So you don't have that extra risk involved when you are making that deal. If it all goes well, King opts out after 2026, and essentially it's a 1-year contract. No team, not just the Orioles, but really no team, is going to sacrifice a draft pick that high for what, if it goes well, is going to become a 1-year deal, especially on a pitcher with durability and injury concerns where that 1 year might not even go that well. And then he puts you under the microscope for $30 million for a guy who's injured again, right? Now, there's always injury risk with any pitcher you could possibly sign, but Michael King, with the injury and the durability, not even risks and just questions involved as well, is not the kind of guy you're going to give a 1-year deal to and sacrifice not just the money, but also the draft pick as well. So because of all that, it feels like this is a spot where the only team that could realistically and feel good about giving Michael King the contract that he wanted to bet on himself and go back into free agency next year was the San Diego Padres. In a way, now it's different, but in a way, it's kind of similar to Corbin Burns going to the D-backs last offseason, despite reportedly having offers for more money. It's that he wanted to pitch close to home in Arizona, and so he signed there. And it's different for Michael King, the reasoning why he's going back to San Diego. But all in all, not that the Orioles couldn't have made this kind of deal, but it's not very smart business to not only go after a guy, again, who was down at number 5 on my list because of durability concerns, and then make it a deal that could basically be a 1-year deal and also sacrifice a very valuable draft pick. Now, you could argue that that's still worth it for the Orioles to go and do it if you really love Michael King, and I will totally accept that argument and see where you're coming from. But this is different than Dylan Cease going to Toronto, right? Dylan Cease going to Toronto for 7 years, $210. I know the Orioles were interested in Dylan Cease, but they got outbid in years and money in terms of what they were willing to spend. They were not willing, it seems, to go 7 years and $210 million for Dylan Cease. I think from what I've heard and what I just see from the market and what the Orioles think, I think the O's would have been willing, even if they were only willing to give 3 years, to pay more than $75 million over 3 years to get Michael King. And they may have even offered him that. However, because of these special circumstances and how he wants to bet on himself and become a free agent again next year, the Padres became, again, this is not an Orioles thing. This is the other teams that were involved in him. The Padres became really the only thing or the only team who could give him exactly what he wanted, at least this year, in free agency. So, okay, Michael King is off the board. Still some top arms out there. What is left for the O's, and what is that most likely signing for Baltimore? We'll get to that coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Game Time. The World Cup is coming back to North America for the first time since 1994. And with 48 teams for the first time ever, it's going to be massive. But let's be honest, getting tickets is usually the hardest part. That's why the Game Time app is clutch, finally giving fans a real advantage when it comes to snagging seats. With Game Time, you can track price drops in real time, get alerts when great seats open, and buy tickets the moment they hit the app. It puts the power back in your hands and makes going to the World Cup realistic instead of impossible. You just pick a game, you tap a section, you have your tickets locked in within minutes on the Game Time app, and the prices, they include the fees up front. There's no last-second surprises at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying World Cup tickets in every match, concert, or event with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, make an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. That's at Game Time. So we're going to get to what is next for the Orioles. But first, I got to tell you again about the Everydayer Club. I want to thank you for making Locked On Orioles your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network. You already live your team every day. Now you can take it up a level and go ad-free. Join the Everydayer Club today and get Locked On Orioles with no interruptions, members-only Discord access, and more, all for just $5 per month or $50 per year to save a little money. Just go to lockedonorioles.supercast.com or check the link in the show notes to learn more about joining the Everydayer Club. All right, so Michael King is off the board for the Orioles. Signs a 3-year deal with the Padres with opt-outs, as we talked about. Kind of the only team that was going to be willing to give him a deal that it seemed like he wanted after testing the market here for a little bit. So now the question is, where do the Orioles turn for a top-line type starting pitcher? As I talked about, 5 free agents who I think are kind of in that top line. Dylan Cease already signed with the Blue Jays. He was #1 for me. What you have left is #2 on my list. That is Tatsuya Imai. Still a bit of a question mark coming over from Japan, but good stuff. Only 27 years old. #3 on my list was Ranger Suarez, lefty from the Phillies, has put up great numbers, but he has some back injury concerns. He has some velocity concerns. Reporting is that he might want 7 years and that really no one is willing to give him that in free agency. And then #4 on my list is Framber Valdez, great lefty. He's been really, really good. Probably the most sure thing of the 3 pitchers left, but there's character concerns, although Mike Elias would know him best from his time along with him over in Houston. Now, this market could take some time off after King signed, or it could heat up pretty closely because there is a deadline here that's going to get the pitching market going, and that is Tatsuya Imai's posting deadline, which is January 2nd. Because the way that posting rules happen between NPB and MLB, from the moment a pitcher is posted, they have 45 days to sign with a major league team, and if they don't, they are back to playing in Japan. And Tatsuya Imai, his posting window ends on January 2nd. So by the end of the day on January 2nd, he has to have a deal done by a major league team, and he's not going to go back to NPB. He is going to sign with someone by that point. Now, a lot of teams do try their best to take most of that week between Christmas and New Year's off from making moves. That was a little more true, 10, 15, 20 years ago, not as much now. Thanks, AJ Preller. But I don't really think either Imai or his agent, who is Scott Boras, would want this to go all the way to the deadline day of January 2nd without a deal, because if you do, you lose leverage, right? This is why players don't want, there's been talk of, hey, because the MLB offseason is boring at times, could there be some sort of signing deadline for players to get the action going a little bit? And the players are going to be against that because you do lose leverage, right? If you put a deadline of February 1st to sign as a free agent or January 1st or whatever, and you're not signed by that day, teams are going to lowball you on offers and say, well, if you don't sign, you're not playing baseball this year and not making money. And to a lower degree, because I can still just go back to Japan, this is what comes in. So if him and Boras go to January 2nd still without a deal, you're going to lose some leverage. Teams are going to say, hey, here's my low ball offer because you better take it today or you're not pitching in Major League Baseball in 2026. So because of that, and because of teams maybe not being as willing, although I think they'd negotiate for a player like Imai over the holidays, there's a chance that Tatsuya Imai could sign in the next 3 to 4 days here to get this deal done well before any holiday break and well before the window closes. Now, I feel like Imai is the least likely of those three, with Valdez and Suarez, to actually sign with the Orioles. I think he's going to cost the most years and probably the most money, though he is number one of the three on my wish list remaining for the free agent starting pitchers. I think he is the domino that teams are waiting to fall. Pretty much everyone to some capacity is in on Tatsuya Imai. We know he's been taking meetings with major league teams. We don't know at this point any of the teams that he has met with so far. I'd have to think the Orioles at least tried to get a meeting. We will see if that happened. But so as long as he picks a team by January 2nd, then I think Ranger Suarez and Framber Valdez as the next best two could go quickly off the board, because you have these teams trying to get Amaya. Okay, Amaya signed. We turn our attention to the next best two things, who could be a number one type pitcher. Once those two guys sign, then you're moving down the list to kind of the next tier of guys, right? So my official prediction, honestly, I think the Orioles are going to sign Framber Valdez, right? I know there are character concerns. We've talked about them. The incident with his catcher that happened this season in Houston, I get all of that. But if one front office besides the Astros is going to know best about who Framber Valdez really is, it's the Orioles. Mike Elias was there for a long time. Kobe Perez was there, kind of signing him out of the Dominican Republic. And I don't think they're going to spend that many years and money on a starting pitcher if they think there are serious character concerns. So if Valdez ends up being the guy who comes to Baltimore, you got to feel like they at least feel comfortable about who he is in that clubhouse. I'm going to guess something like 5 years, I don't know, 160 to 170-ish million dollars gets Framber Valdez in Baltimore. That is my official prediction for the guy that they are going to sign. Now, the question I think really becomes, and you really start to worry because there's been reported interest, especially in Valdez and Suarez, but in all three, including Amai from the Orioles. The question becomes, okay, Connor, you said there were 5 top guys available. Cease already signed with the Blue Jays. King already signed with the Padres. There's 3 of them left. What if the Orioles don't get any of those 3? What do they do then? That is when it starts to become a little bit of panic time for the Orioles this offseason. So we'll discuss what the plan would be at that point to finish off the show coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. And live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. And FanDuel lets you jump into the moment with live spreads and money lines that adjust instantly and player props that update as guys heat up. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long at FanDuel. The game moves fast, and so can you. So for the Orioles, Michael King is gone. We know Dylan Cease is gone. Those 3 remaining top pitchers, Framber Valdez, Ranger Suarez, and Tatsuya Imai. So again, my prediction is that the Orioles will get Framber. But the question beyond that is, what if they don't get any of those 3? Can they still find a top starting pitcher this offseason? I think especially with Michael King going back to San Diego, it is an unfortunate possibility, even more so now, that the Orioles don't get any of the top 5 free agent starters, because no one really thought the Padres, with their current financial situation, were going to sign a big-time free agent starting pitcher. So now there's one fewer big arm out there with Michael King signing, but the same amount of teams are involved, right? I would say the Giants, Orioles, Cubs, and Mets are like a definite top 4 looking for good free agent starters, with only 3 big-name arms remaining. And then even I'd say, Red Sox, Phillies, Angels, Astros, all definitely in the mix to add some impact pitching this offseason. So then you have to kind of look at the next batch of free agents. And if you're watching here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, this is kind of the spreadsheet that I've been working off of that I throw up on the screen here throughout this offseason of my wish list of both free agent and trade starting pitchers available this offseason. So you can see kind of in the top left there, free agent, top of the rotation guys. I mentioned Cisamai, Suarez, Valdez, and King. Then you have my top 10 of mid-rotation starters available in free agency. 2 of them are gone. Merrill Kelly was my number 1, signed with the D-backs for 2 years. And then Cody Ponce coming over from KBO is my number 4. He signed for 3 years with the Blue Jays. So left on my list, number 2, Chris Bassett. Number 3, Zach Gallen. Number 5, Justin Verlander. 6, Zach Eflin. 7, Lucas Giolito. 8, Tyler Mahle. 9, Zach Littell. And 10, Nick Martinez are my top 10 free agent kind of mid-rotation starters. These are all guys where I'd say they would absolutely help the Orioles. They would absolutely be one of their 5 best starting pitchers, and they would be in the opening day rotation. But I'd waver on whether or not I want these guys to start a playoff game. And if any of these guys is the best starting pitcher that the Orioles acquired this offseason, I would consider that offseason a failure for the Orioles. So they would all help, and I'd be all happy to get any of these guys, but only if they're the number 2 starter that the Orioles acquire. So the O's are going to have to first kind of jump into that second tier. Now, Jeff Passan reported in an ESPN story on Thursday that the Orioles have also been very aggressive in kind of the second tier of free agent starters while being aggressive in the first tier as well. And as I've said all offseason, the O's need 2 starters, preferably 1 guy from the first tier and 1 guy from the second tier. So it makes sense that they're keeping up the conversations with all of those pitchers who are out there. So yes, it's good to get one of these guys, but only if you also get one of the top guys. If you're in a situation where Amai, Suarez, and Valdez all also sign elsewhere and the Orioles don't get any of them, like, yes, I'd love to see the Orioles get a Chris Bassett or a Lucas Giolito. I think it would help the team, but you just can't let that be the top starter that you acquire, so you have to turn your attention to trades. I have 13 starting pitchers up here who have been somewhat at some point linked to being available in trade this offseason, who I think would all definitely make the Orioles better in their rotation, and they could just consider going after them. Freddie Peralta, Joe Ryan, Sandy Alcantara, Pablo Lopez, top 4. Sonny Gray was number 5, but he's already been dealt to the Red Sox from the Cardinals. Then Nick Pivetta, Chris Bubich, Mackenzie Gore, Edward Cabrera, David Peterson, Kodai Senga, Mitch Keller, and Brady Singer are the top 13 in order. Now, for me, I would say the top 4 are the ones where I would feel comfortable saying if the Orioles traded for that guy, that is totally acceptable and exciting if that is your best starting pitcher you acquire this offseason, right? So if they miss out on the other 3 top free agents and they trade for any one of Freddie Peralta, Joe Ryan, Sandy Alcantara, or Pablo Lopez, I would say that's a true like potential number 1 type guy in the mix with those other free agents. I feel good about that being your number 1. Now, the recent reporting has been that neither Ryan or Lopez are available right now via trade, and the Twins are going to try to go for it, and it's kind of shaky on the availability of Alcantara and Peralta right now. Sonny Gray would have been on the fence about whether or not he was a good enough best pitcher to acquire. And then the next 4 guys on the list, you could argue it's okay if they're the best pitcher the O's get, depending on what else they do. So the next 4 is Nick Pivetta, Chris Bubich, Mackenzie Gore, and Edward Cabrera. Pivetta, I love Pivetta. He's got number 1 type stuff, I think. He's just never put it together. He's probably a rental. He's going to opt out after next year. Bubich looked amazing last season before he got injured, but it doesn't have a long track record of being good. Mackenzie Gore has all the stuff, is younger, has had amazing first halves and then disappointing second halves. And then Edward Cabrera, again, has all the stuff of a true ace starting pitcher. He's been linked to the Orioles in trade already, but as we've talked about, just so many injury concerns, he's never pitched a full season as a starter at the big league level. So if you got one of those guys and maybe paired it with a Chris Bassett or a Zach Gallen in free agency, I'd maybe be okay with one of those 4 guys being your best, because the second best you get is a guy who can eat innings, be durable, and still be pretty good as well. The next 4 on the list, David Peterson, Kodai Senga, Mitch Keller, and Brady Singer, I think are all guys who would help the Orioles rotation, would make them better, would be in their top 5, be in the opening day rotation, but just not good enough if any of those 4. You can't tell me that if they get any of those 4 that you'd feel okay if that's the best starting pitcher that the Orioles acquire. So that's kind of what is remaining out there. The pressure kind of remains on. I will say, again, I'm confident the O's are going to get one of these 3 big guys left. Imai, Suarez, Valdez. The prediction is Valdez. I think it's going to happen. If they don't get them, I'm confident the Orioles will do what it takes to make a trade for one of the other top guys and sign a Chris Bassett or Zach Gallen type to pair in the rotation. I'm confident the Orioles are going to acquire 2 starting pitchers this offseason. I think their rotation is going to get a lot better than it is right now. And that rotation right now is Bradish, Rogers, Kramer, Tyler Wells, Cade Povich. It needs to be better than that going into opening day, and it will be. They're going to get 2 starters. The question just is, I wouldn't say the numbers are dwindling as you're looking at the spreadsheet right now. Again, the large majority of the names via trade or free agency are still out there to get. But as these names start coming off the board, if they're not going to Baltimore, you start to worry a little bit, and the pressure gets on, and the pressure is going to be really on if the Orioles don't get any of the remaining top 3. I'm confident they're going to get either one of the top 3 free agents or one of those 4 trade targets. The way they've been talking, the way they've been operating, Pete Alonso, Grayson Rodriguez deals, this is a different offseason for the Orioles. They're operating differently. But again, when it comes to big-time pitching, they still haven't done it, and I understand if you want to say, I'm going to wait till I see it to believe it. That is totally understandable. Maybe I'll get burned here, and I think the O's are going to do this, but I just think the way they've been talking and operating, it is going to be a different type of offseason for the O's. And if they do make that move, of course, we're going to have it covered right here on the Locked On Orioles podcast. And if you are enjoying the show, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. We are very close to 10,000 subscribers here on YouTube. The goal is to get there by the new year. If we do, we'll have a cool giveaway for subscribers only. If you're an audio listener, of course, always make sure to subscribe and follow the show. Leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and tell your friends about the show. That really, really helps us out here at Locked On Orioles. And if you have thoughts about the show, Orioles questions, just want to talk some ball, you can always email me, lockedonorioles@gmail.com. Again, we are into the off-season mode of about 2 months here where we go down to 3 episodes per week, but you still got 4 episodes this week, so make sure to check those out. With the holiday next week, it will more than likely just be a 3-episode week, and it'll be that way until mid-February, unless we get some breaking news at some point. Even if it is during the holidays, that breaking news, if it is a big signing or big trade, you can get it all covered right here at Locked On Orioles. And if you need a last-minute holiday gift or someone keeps asking what you want, make it easy. Ask for the Everydayer Club. You can get ad-free episodes of the show, exclusive Discord server access, and more. And those subscriptions can be gifted through lockedonorioles.supercast.com. I'm back on Monday. If we get any news between now and then, surely we'll recap that. If not, we'll get that Dylan Beavers season recap episode going and talking about would he be included in any kind of starting pitcher trade this offseason. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.